What role does the coast play in the Iditarod?
Well, it's such a can have such a increased level of intensity because of obviously because of the weather, lack of landmarks. We have very few trees, and it's way easier to get off of a trail when it's just wandering through jumbled ice. And the other thing is that this is a part of the race when dogs and mushers are tired, and things that were quite manageable when well rested get to be quite a challenge in when they're exhausted. I don't know what happened out there. I heard he got off of the correct trail and it was going the wrong direction. Super rare that any trail goes the wrong direction. Sometimes they split and come back together. Wouldn't be surprised if once he realized, geez, this doesn't seem like it, stayed on it a while, hoping it would come back, and then decided it wouldn't. I can only guess. But historically, people losing the trail on the coast is, to my recollection, unheard of. It's more likely to occur somewhere in the interior where there's trails that go to different places. But I guess a few years ago somebody did head into Koyak and ended up going way off course, come to think of it. But you see the light is flat, a little bit of snow and a little bit of wind. Like the little squall I was in on the Beaver Hills outside of Don's cabin. Once visibility drops beyond that which there are markers or landmarks, you really feel like you're in a snow globe, and finding your way is a lot tougher. There's always a challenge being in front as well. Dogs sent another dog on the trail, and way more unlikely that provided now in this case it sounds like Yor figured out he went the wrong way, and he kept his dogs going on the correct trail and not following Nick. Also very possible that a team follows a team that's taken the wrong trail, especially if they're the only dog team in front of you. But the coast is a villain. It's the weather. I've had I've scratched twice in my career in the Iditarod, both here on the coast, and it's when you're exhausted and the weather really beats you up. It didn't sound like anybody's getting beat up by the weather in this case, but visibility, I'm sure, was tough, flat, light, and I cautious to there's just a certain amount of Russian roulette being played because the trail is not marked the same everywhere. There are places going in and out of Shagaluk and where there were no options to turn, and literally dozens, if not hundreds, of markers. Yet on the Beaver Hills, there and on the Yukon, there were places coming down last night. I thought, oh my gosh, if it starts blowing here and the trail is erased visibly, you'd have a heck of a time following it because the markers were half mile to a mile apart. It seems so obvious when the trail is visible, but with 40 years of experience, I know that how quickly visibility can turn away, and all of a sudden you have a challenge. But I don't like being in front of a race until the end, and that's one of the reasons. I don't like being the one trying to pick the trail every instant, and one of the reasons I think I screwed up in this year's race out of Ophir was basically going alone. Nobody very close ahead of me, a very inexperienced musher coming up behind me. You are so committed, and Nick was very committed out there to use his expertise, of which is significant, but it is not as good as his and yours expertise. In this case, he could have held off, and if he thought he had more speed, stay with the oar, to use the expertise of staying together, making sure we're on the right trail until you're back in landmarks. I mean, that's another strategy. It's not been Nick's strategy that he needs any help from anybody, and which is fine. He needs very little help, but it turned out last night he could have used a little help from Yor, and he was far enough ahead of him, which puts him at a risk of not having access to that expertise. So, long answer, I'm trying to be good here.
Good. I just had one last thing. Can you explain?
Oh, baloney.
This is it. Can you explain just the trail between Shack Tulik and Koyak? What does it look like? What's it like?
Well,
generally.
The trail from Shack Tulik to Koyak, that part of which is on land and not on ice and water, is so flat you can't often tell the difference whether you're on land, snow-covered land, or snow-covered ice, because they just merge into one another, especially if it's dark. And so it's open and flat, and the trail between Shack Tulik and Koyak, at least the part over the water, which is the majority of it, changes every year. It depends on where the jumbled ice gets pushed up, and we got a musher memorandum thing today from the race manager saying the trail out of Shack winds around, makes it feels like you're going in circles, because they're literally curly-cueing around jumbled ice. So it does really take paying attention, because it can seem like you're going entirely the wrong way, because you are functionally, but you have to get around an obstacle that you don't know is there. So it really is important to pay attention, and boy, paying attention is what it's all about, and it's not easy to do when you're exhausted.